Welcome back, everyone. This is the third part of this ongoing series on transcendental arguments. In the last video, I gave a sketch of what a transcendental argument for Christian theism would look like. I gave a short argument that establishes that Christian theism is transcendentally necessary. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at an illustration of how the self-defeating nature of the negation of Christian theism can be established. That is, we're going to be defending the second premise of the argument in this video. First of all, a quick recap of the argument. The argument goes like this. Premise 1. If the negation of Christian theism is self-defeating, then Christian theism is transcendentally necessary. Premise 2. The negation of Christian theism is self-defeating. Premise 3. Therefore, Christian theism is transcendentally necessary. In the last video, I explained the crucial concepts of self-defeat and transcendental necessity. I also mentioned that in the defense of the second premise, all that is required is a unifying general principle which can unite various forms of alternatives to Christianity. I also explained that by illustrating the self-defeating nature of this general principle, the proponent of the transcendental argument would have effectively demonstrated that the negation of Christian theism is self-defeating, and his conclusion would follow. We're going to be illustrating how exactly the principle of autonomy, which unites various forms of unbelief, is self-defeating. In the last video, I explained that the principle of autonomy states that human knowledge is possible without dependence upon divine revelation. There is a crucial implication of such a view. This is the implication that human knowledge is original as opposed to being derivative. In order to understand this distinction between original and derivative knowledge, we must contrast the Christian and the non-Christian pictures of knowledge. On the Christian view, all facts are first and foremost thought of in the mind of God. It is God's mind and God's thinking that makes the facts what they are. All the relations between all the facts are made possible because God relates all facts comprehensively into an exhaustive system through his eternal plan and counsel. Hence, all facts are created facts. Even prior to their instantiation, God has already known the facts. In this system, man's knowledge is derivative of God's knowledge. Man tries to reconstruct God's system of knowledge by thinking God's thoughts after him. He can do this because God has revealed his original system in a way which man can understand. So man is a derivative knower on this view, while God is an original knower. The non-Christian picture rejects this view I've just described. On such a view, there is no God who exhaustively relates all the facts. Because human knowledge is autonomous in this view, man must be the original knower. Man comes to the facts as they are. He must be the first to rationalize, categorize, order, and introduce any kind of system to the objects of knowledge. It is in this sense that man's knowledge is original. However, there are two problematic implications for this view that man's knowledge is original. These implications are that prior to man's rational activity, there were no relations between the various objects of knowledge. The second implication is that man's knowledge becomes purely subjective. Let's consider these two implications in turn. Man's knowledge being original would imply that the relationships and connections and the system which relates all the objects of knowledge become contingent on the mind of man. And if this is the case, then there are no real objective relations between the facts or between the objects of knowledge. It is man's rational activity that furnishes these relations. And man and his rational activity are not eternal. Objectively, these facts have no inherent relationship to one another. It is man's mind that provides the system that categorizes and orders these unrelated facts. This implies that knowledge is impossible. Knowledge of facts requires relations between facts. We must be able to relate various facts into a comprehensive system in order for them to be intelligible. Such relations include causal relations, logical relations, conceptual relations, mathematical relations, etc. Without these sorts of systems, knowledge of facts would be impossible. Take any object of experience as an example. That object is only intelligible to us because we can apply certain concepts and categories to it. Perhaps we could talk about its color or its shape or what kind of object it is. However, without any of these systems which can unite various particular facts, we would not be able to make sense of the object. So we can see that the intelligibility and our knowledge of an object is contingent on us being able to provide a system that can properly interpret that object. So if there were no objective relations between facts and no system that precedes the facts, then the facts would be inherently unknowable. This leads to the second problematic implication, that man's knowledge becomes purely subjective. If man's knowledge is original, then he is essentially imposing his own categories of thought onto facts which bear no inherent relationship to one another. He is arbitrarily imposing these categories and concepts and systems upon facts which have nothing to do with these categories. Because there is no objective relationship between facts, he cannot know the objects as they are. His knowledge must be subjective. Because he cannot provide an objective basis for imposing his own categories of thought, which are purely internal to his mind, upon the facts which may, for all he knows, have no kind of systematic relationship to one another. If man's knowledge is original, then his knowledge must be subjective, and subjectivism implies that knowledge is impossible. Here we have a clear illustration of the self-defeating nature of the negation of Christian theism, because the negation of Christian theism implies that human reasoning is autonomous, and autonomy implies that man's knowledge is original, but the originality of human knowledge implies that human knowledge is impossible, because the two implications, that the facts have no relation and that human knowledge is subjective, both imply that knowledge is impossible. Hence, we can see that if Christianity is rejected, human knowledge is impossible. And this demonstrates the self-defeating nature of unbelief. And our second premise has been defended. Thank you everyone once again for listening and watching this video. This was the third installment of the series on transcendental arguments. In the next video, I will be discussing a second strategy for demonstrating the transcendental necessity of Christian theism. In order not to miss that, you should like and subscribe and leave a comment to see what kind of content you would like. Once again, thanks for watching.